Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the autopsy of the global economy. Before we dissect the corpse, we must understand how the patient was murdered. The year is 2005. The American housing market is not just booming, it is hallucinating. It is a fever dream of endless credit, where strippers own 5 investment properties and unemployed immigrants are given $500,000 loans. On the surface, this looks like prosperity, but if you look at the balance sheets, it looks like a crime scene. Most people believe that the 2008 crash happened because of bad luck. That is a lie. It happened because of a specific financial product invented 3 decades earlier by a man named Louis Ranieri. It was called the mortgage-backed security, or MBS. The concept was simple but lethal. Banks used to lend money to buy a house and wait 30 years to get paid back. It was slow. It was boring. Ranieri changed the game. He took thousands of these individual mortgages, bundled them together into a single bond, and sold them to investors. Suddenly, debt became a tradable commodity. Wall Street loved it. They made billions on the fees. But by 2005, they had run out of good borrowers. To keep the machine running, they had to start lending to people who could not pay. They called them subprime. I call them toxic assets. While the rest of the world was busy celebrating this false wealth, one man was sitting in a dark office in San Jose, listening to heavy metal and reading the fine print. Dr. Michael Burry. He is not a banker. He is a neurologist turned hedge fund manager with a glass eye and 0 social skills. He does not care about narratives. He does not care about what the chairman of the Federal Reserve says on television. He only cares about the numbers. And the numbers were screaming. Burry did something that no one on Wall Street had ever done before. He actually read the prospectuses. These were thousands of pages of boring legal documents that detailed every single mortgage inside those bonds. What he found was terrifying. The majority of these loans were adjustable rate mortgages with low teaser rates. The borrowers were barely making payments as it was, but in 2007, those rates were scheduled to reset. They would double, sometimes triple. Burry realized that the entire U.S. housing market was mathematically guaranteed to default. It wasn't a possibility, it was a certainty. So, Burry decides to do the unthinkable. He decides to bet against the American economy. But there is a problem. You can't just short a house. There was no financial instrument that allowed you to bet on a mortgage bond failing. So, Burry had to invent one. He walks into the biggest banks in the world, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, and asks them to create a credit default swap, or CDS, for him. Let me explain what a credit default swap is, because this is the murder weapon. Imagine you buy an insurance policy on your neighbor's house. You pay a monthly premium. If the house burns down, you get paid full value. But here's the catch. You don't own the house, and you can buy policies on the same house over and over again. Burry was essentially buying fire insurance on a house that he knew was already filled with gasoline and a lit match. The bankers at Goldman Sachs laughed at him. They thought he was throwing free money at them. They were happily selling him these swaps because they believed the housing market never goes down. They looked at Burry and saw a fool. Burry looked at them and saw the victims of their own greed. He bought $1.3 billion worth of insurance. His investors went crazy. They thought he had lost his mind. They saw him paying millions of dollars a month in premiums for insurance on assets that were supposedly risk-free. They didn't understand that Burry wasn't looking at the present. He was waiting for the future to collide with reality. Meanwhile, in another corner of Wall Street, the smell of smoke began to drift through the air. Enter Jared Venet. Based on the real-life trader Greg Lippman from Deutsche Bank, Venet is not a genius visionary like Burry. He is a salesman. He is a shark. Through a wrong number phone call, he hears about this crazy fund manager in California who is betting against the housing market. Most people would ignore it. Venet investigates it. Venet realizes that Burry is right. The bonds are garbage. But Venet doesn't want to fix the system. He wants to profit from its destruction. He realizes that if the housing market crashes, these credit default swaps will be worth a fortune. He decides to become the middleman. He starts pitching this trade to anyone who will listen. He uses a Jenga tower to demonstrate the fragility of the market. He shows hedge fund managers that the AAA-rated bonds at the top of the tower are actually resting on a foundation of B-rated subprime filth. If the bottom falls out, the whole tower collapses. This is where the true horror of the financial industry is revealed. It isn't just that they made bad loans, it's that they packaged those bad loans, stamped them with a AAA rating, and sold them to pension funds and grandmothers as safe investments. Venet calls it dog shit wrapped in cat shit, and he is absolutely right. As 2005 turns into 2006, The tension builds. Burry is bleeding money on premiums. His investors are threatening to sue him. The banks are partying with their bonuses. The price of the bonds isn't moving, even though mortgage delinquencies are starting to rise. This is the fraud phase of the cycle. The market is rigged to hide the truth for as long as possible, but mathematics has no mercy. The clock is ticking towards 2007, and the variable rates are about to reset. The match has been dropped. It's just taking a while for the fire to reach the dynamite. We have the data. We have the mechanism. Now, we need the anger. Enter Mark Baum. In reality, his name is Steve Eisman, a hedge fund manager who viewed Wall Street not as a financial center, but as a crime syndicate that hadn't been prosecuted yet. While Michael Burry was looking at the market from a mathematical perspective, Baum was looking at it from a moral one. He suspected that the banking system was fundamentally dishonest, and he was about to get the proof. When Jared Venet pitches the credit default swap idea to Baum's team, their first reaction is disbelief. Not because they trust the market, but because they can't believe the banks would be stupid enough to sell insurance on their own suicide. Venet explains that the banks are greedy, not stupid. They are prioritizing short-term fees over long-term survival. But Baum follows the first rule of auditing: trust, but verify. He doesn't just look at the spreadsheets, he decides to go to the scene of the crime. Baum and his team travel to Florida. This is where the abstract numbers on a screen turn into concrete reality. They expect to find a booming real estate market. Instead, they find a ghost town. They drive through neighborhoods where half the houses are for sale and the other half are empty. They knock on doors and find renters who have no idea their landlord hasn't paid the mortgage in months. One tenant tells them, "I pay my rent in cash to the landlord." That money was never going to the bank. It was being stolen. The mortgage was delinquent, yet the bond backed by that mortgage was still rated AAA. This is the physical audit. Wall Street operates in a digital fantasy, but the underlying asset is physical. If the house is empty, the bond is worthless. It is that simple. Then, Baum meets the foot soldiers of this fraud, the mortgage brokers. In one of the most disturbing scenes of the film, Baum interviews two brokers who specialize in ninja loans. No income, no job, no assets. These men are not financial experts. They are hustlers. They brag about signing up immigrants, strippers, and people with bad credit for adjustable rate mortgages. They laugh about how they earn thousands of dollars in commissions for every loan they close, regardless of whether the borrower can pay it back. Baum asks them, "Do you verify their income?" They laugh. "Stated income," they reply. In the industry, these were known as liar loans. You literally just wrote down how much you wanted to make, and the bank gave you the money. Baum realizes something terrifying here. These brokers aren't confessing because they feel guilty. They are bragging because they think the party will never end. They are incentivized to commit fraud. The bank pays them to lie. But the corruption goes higher, much higher. Baum realizes that for these garbage loans to be sold to pension funds, someone has to stamp them with a seal of approval. That someone is the rating agency. Standard & Poor's, S&P, Moody's, and Fitch. These are the gatekeepers. They are supposed to be the neutral referees. Baum travels to the headquarters of Standard & Poor's in New York. He confronts an analyst. He asks her how she can possibly give a AAA rating, the same rating as US Treasury bonds, to a pile of subprime loans that are clearly defaulting. The analyst's answer exposes the fatal flaw of the entire modern financial system. She admits, if we don't give them the ratings, they'll go to Moody's.
If we don't work with them, they will go to our competitors. Not our fault, simply the way the world works.
This is the conflict of interest. The rating agencies are for-profit companies paid by the very banks they are supposed to regulate. If you are a policeman paid by the thief, you are not going to make many arrests. Baum realizes the game is rigged. The banks create the toxic product. The brokers sell it to unsuspecting borrowers. The rating agencies lie about its safety. And the SEC? The regulators are either asleep or looking for jobs at the banks they are supposed to be policing. By the time Baum returns to New York, he is no longer just skeptical. He is convinced that the entire world is walking on a bridge made of paper, and someone has just lit a match. He tells his team to buy everything. He wants to short the entire financial sector.
Short everything that guy has touched. I want 500 million more swaps.
He isn't just betting on a market correction anymore. He is betting on the collapse of institutional trust. Meanwhile, back in California, Michael Burry is facing his own crisis. His investors are revolting. They see the stock market hitting all-time highs, and they think Burry is throwing their money away. They don't see what Burry sees. They don't see what Baum saw in Florida. This is the loneliness of the contrarian. When you are right too early, you look exactly like you are wrong. Burry locks his investors' capital, refusing to let them withdraw. It is a desperate legal move. He is literally holding their money hostage to save them from themselves. As 2007 begins, the cracks start to show. Two Bear Stearns hedge funds collapse. This is the first tremor. The market shudders, but then it recovers. Wall Street spins the narrative. It's contained, they say. Subprime is a small part of the market. It was a lie. But it was a lie that bought them time to offload their own bad assets onto unsuspecting customers. Then comes the specific meeting in Las Vegas at the American Securitization Forum. This is the belly of the beast. Baum interviews a CDO manager. This is a man who manages collateralized debt obligations. If you thought MBS was bad, CDOs are worse. They are the leftovers of the leftovers. The manager tells Baum that he doesn't represent the investors, he represents the banks, and then he drops the bombshell. Synthetic CDOs. A synthetic CDO is a bet on a bet. It is pure gambling. There is no actual mortgage involved anymore. It is just billions of dollars of side bets on whether the original bonds will fail. For every $1 of actual bad loans, there were $20 of synthetic bets piled on top of it. This is why the 2008 crisis wasn't a $500 billion problem. It was a $50 trillion problem. The leverage was infinite. Baum walks away from that dinner feeling sick. He realizes the system isn't just insolvent, it is criminally insane. The short is on. The trap is set. The bet is placed. But for months, nothing happens. This is the most psychologically brutal part of the short. It is called the bleed. In 2007, mortgage delinquencies hit historic highs. People are walking away from their homes in record numbers. Mathematically, the bonds should be worthless. But on the trading screens, the prices remain unchanged. In some cases, they even go up. Michael Burry is baffled. He checks his models. The data is correct. The market is wrong. But the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. His investors are no longer just angry. They are suing him for fraud. They accuse him of burning their money. Burry writes emails to them, explaining the concept of fraudulent pricing, but they don't read them. They just want their money back. Burry is forced to fire half his staff. He stops playing the drums. He sits in silence, watching the ticker, knowing that the system is lying to him. Why didn't the prices drop? This is the market rigging phase. The big banks, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, were the market makers. They controlled the pricing marks. They knew the assets were toxic, but they held huge positions in them. If they marked the price down to reality, they would be insolvent instantly. So, they held the prices artificially high. They froze the market. They were essentially selling tickets to a burning theater while blocking the exits, just so they could sneak out the back door first. They spent months offloading their toxic dog shit onto unsuspecting customers, pension funds, foreign governments, and regular investors, before finally admitting the house was on fire. Then, the dam breaks. It starts with Bear Stearns in March 2008. One of the oldest investment banks in America is sold for $2 a share. The illusion of safety shatters. Suddenly, the banks start returning calls. They are desperate to buy back the insurance swaps they sold to Burry, Baum, and Vennet. Mark Baum realizes the scale of the horror during a meeting with his own risk assessors at Morgan Stanley. He discovers that his own parent company, the bank backing his trades, has not only lost money on the housing market, they have leveraged themselves into oblivion. They were betting on the housing market with leverage ratios of 30-1. They didn't just buy the bonds, they sold insurance on the bonds they bought. It was financial suicide. Baum asks, "How much are you short?" The answer is silence. The realization hits him. There is no other side of the trade anymore. The counterparty is dead. If Morgan Stanley fails, Baum doesn't get paid. He wins the bet, but the casino goes bankrupt. This leads to the most important moral lesson of the film. Ben Rickard, played by Brad Pitt, is in a pub with the two young investors, Charlie and Jamie. They are celebrating. They just made millions. They are high-fiving, and Rickard snaps. He tells them to stop dancing. "You just bet against the American economy," he says.
You just bet against the American economy.
If we are right, people lose homes. People lose jobs. People lose retirement savings. People lose pensions. He reminds them that for every 1% unemployment goes up, 40,000 people die. This isn't a game, it's a tragedy. September 15th, 2008, the day the world stood still. Lehman Brothers files for bankruptcy. The footage of employees walking out with cardboard boxes is not just cinema. It is historical documentation of the end of an era. The global financial system freezes. Credit stops. Ships full of grain cannot leave ports because letters of credit are denied. ATMs run dry. The world stares into the abyss of a total economic collapse. Burry finally sells. He doesn't celebrate. He just sends a final email to his investors. Profit, 489.34%. Billions of dollars in profit. He was right. He was the only one who was right. But there is no victory lap. He closes the fund and disappears from the public eye. Mark Baum holds out the longest. He refuses to sell. He wants the banks to feel the pain. He wants to see them bleed. But eventually, he realizes that the banks won't pay the price. The taxpayers will. The government steps in with the bailout. TARP. Trillions of dollars of public money are pumped into the very institutions that caused the crisis. The executives who destroyed the economy take their golden parachutes and walk away. Not a single senior executive goes to jail. So, what is the final audit of this case? What changed? Nothing. In the aftermath, Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Act, pretending to regulate the banks. But the banks just hired more lobbyists to water it down. They are bigger now than they were in 2008. And the CDOs? They didn't disappear. They just changed their name. They are now called bespoke tranche opportunities. It's the same poison in a new bottle. The film ends with a terrifying note. Michael Burry is now investing in the only asset that matters, water. It is a reminder that the next crisis won't just be about money. It will be about survival. The 2008 crisis was not a natural disaster. It was a heist. It was a transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the ultra-rich, facilitated by a corrupt system and authorized by the government. The books were cooked, the ratings were bought, and the regulators were asleep. And the scariest part? The casino is still open, and you are still playing in it.
I'm afraid this hand is mine.
This concludes the audit of The Big Short. Case closed.